Now, I do need to say that Morihei Ueshiba he's one of those characters, one of those figures in history where he was apparently able to do some things which other people weren't able to do, like he was stronger than others, or he was able to do some kind of tricks which seemed supernatural. And I think when that happens, when you have that kind of legendary status, and especially since also you're involved in spirituality, which he was, you could say, very spiritual. Basically, you could say also religious. But then when you have that combination, usually it happens so that those people get tied. Like, flies are attacking me today. What the heck is this? So usually what happens is you become tied with a whole mythology. Or people, when you reach that kind of living legend status, stories about you start to surface, which are, most of them are not true, but they get passed around. Maybe some part of it was true and they get expanded, like, I caught this big fish and you expand the fish, kind of the same dynamics. And the same, I believe, happened with Morihei Ueshiba. And there's actually a funny story. I went through a personal experience of this. It was really crazy. But I'll give you a personal experience example so you would know what I'm talking about. So very, very brief reminder, I was a yoga Aikido instructor, and I would often be invited to schools because it seems apparently I'm very good with especially teenagers or kids. I'm good at inspiring them, kind of engaging them. And so schools would invite me to talk to them and motivate them. And I went to one of the schools, I think to introduce kind of Aikido or something like that. So I was dressed in my Aikido gi, with the whole hakama and everything. It looks quite impressive. And the main teacher who was hosting me or welcoming me, when we stayed in the room, just her, me, and my senior student who was helping me out, she kind of came closer to me and she said, "So, will you be able to show us your magical trick?" And I was like, "What? What are you talking about?" And she's like, I heard that you're able to pass through a pen through a room without touching it." And I'm like, "What?" I'm like, I don't get it. Like, what is she talking about? And I started digging into what she means, and I realized it was a misunderstanding, because when I was doing some projects in schools, there was one exercise, like a teamwork exercise, where I would take a bunch of kids and I would give them an exercise, like a brainstorming exercise. I would tell them, you need to pass on this pen from one side of the room to the other without touching it physically with your hands. And so they would have to come up with creative ways, which one of the best ones is just gather a bunch of pieces of papers or notebooks and, create this line and you pass it down. But so I tried to explain to her, I said, so that's what it is. And she's looking at me like, no, I know. And she's like dead serious. It's like, it's like, don't lie to me. I know you're able to do that. It's like, so come on, will you show it? And I'm like, oh, well, yeah, maybe not today. So basically, there was this legend in her mind that I'm able to pass through a pen through a room without touching it, because it was a misunderstanding. But then, she would tell that to others, obviously, and others would believe, some wouldn't believe. And then, because I was also part of that mythology of spirituality and martial arts, and they're mystified often, I guess that gives a better gateway for these legends to spread. So it's crazy that I actually even went through a personal experience of bumping into that. But I'm dead sure that that's exactly what happened with Morihei Ueshiba. And there are a lot of crazy and interesting stories about him, like people getting knocked out but just being touched by him and so on. And it's hard to say whether it's hypnotic susceptibility, which I made a video on one of my in my main channel about that in the past, or what it was. But I think it's like a mix of everything, mix of unique abilities that individual is able to show, like kind of special abilities, but then mixed with all types of talk. So when I'm going to tell that story, the reason I'm bringing this up is I'll do my best to portray a quick story of Morihei Ueshiba, also known as O-Sensei, the great teacher. But note that I'm not like, a history expert, and I dug into his history quite a bit back in the day. so I will probably portray it quite well, but it's also a mess of, you know, legends and stories and so on. So I'll just give you a brief introduction, but, you know, take it with a grain of salt, and some places I may be mistaken, but I'll give you the main essence, the main picture. So what is important to know about the founder, that based on his history, is that from early days he was inspired and enthusiastic about kind of the mystical or the religious, the supernatural, and he was into Shintoism, the, you know, pagan tradition of Japan. He apparently was a very weak child, and very introverted, so he would spend a lot of time thinking and observing things around him, and based on the story, that's how he got exposed to the whole spirituality traditions and rituals of Shintoism, and he became really fascinated about it, and later he picked up martial arts, and I think those two things always kind of went toe-to-toe in his life. He apparently trained a lot and became very effective martial artist, very powerful one. His devotion can be seen by the interesting moment where he even built a house for a martial arts instructor, Sokaku Takeda, descendant of a samurai line, practitioner of Daijoru Aiki Jiu-Jitsu. And so Morihei Ueshiba built a house for him and hosted him there, and I think provided everything for him just so he would teach him not Aikido. Aikido didn't exist back then, but this Aiki Jiu-Jitsu. So you can see he was kind of very, you know, devoted and very kind of intense. There's a lot of stories about how he was like that. But besides him training martial arts, another significant moment in his life is that he met Onisaburo Deguchi. It's been a while since I said those names, but I think I'm right. He was basically a cult leader, like a spiritual, religious cult leader, and he had his own religion. I think it was in Omotokyo, if I'm not mistaken it, or if it was another one, but I'll write it to you down somewhere. Not that it matters, I guess. But he had his own religion, which apparently, from what I gathered, was aiming to unite all religions, but apparently it was really spiritual. And there's this moment where they went to Korea, I believe, and tried to create this kind of spiritual hub, like an independent city, and they got in trouble and they nearly died. That's the moment where stories say that Morihei Ueshiba was able to see, and I think that's how he perceives it himself, he was able to see bullet lines, like before the guns shot, and he was able to avoid those bullets, and that's how he survived. And I think that story is documented in one of the interviews he gave, so apparently he believed in it himself. Interesting that, a quick note, now that I'm looking back at that, it's been a while since I thought about it all, but if you think about the theory of flow, and there's a great book about it with a weird name. The name is The Rise of Superman. But it's a great scientific book about the state of flow, like that in deadly conditions, your brain goes into maximum capacity, and it's able to do things which you normally wouldn't be able to, like you perceive things in slow motion and so on. It's a legit thing. So, there is a chance that Morihei Ueshiba, he went in that near-death experience where he was shot at from a distance. His brain went into the flow state and he started avoiding those bullets. Maybe, I'm not saying bullets. I think the way he expressed that story in one of the translations is that he perceived the lines of the guns that were aiming, where they were aiming, and he would be able to position himself where he wouldn't get shot, which sounds more realistic a bit than dodging bullets directly. But yeah, so, maybe he did have some of these extraordinary experiences which made him even more into this mystical figure.